Unaware the wife he kicked her out was the secret billionaire who owned the company he worked for. He divorced her to marry his mistress. What she did when she discovered crushed them. Marcus Thornton didn't know that the woman whose belongings he was throwing onto the rain-soaked driveway was actually Viven Ashford Thornton, the secret billionaire owner of Ashford Global Industries, the very company where he'd just been promoted to vice president. As he stood there with his mistress Sienna wrapped around his arm, watching his wife of 12 years pick up her scattered clothes from puddles, he had no idea that the struggling artist he just divorced owned the $8.7 billion empire that signed his paycheck. In 72 hours, Viven would walk into his corner office as the company's CEO. And what she did next wouldn't just end his career, it would obliterate everything he and Sienna had built on the ruins of their marriage. This is the story of how the man who thought he was trading up for a trophy wife discovered he'd thrown away the queen who controlled the entire board. 3 days before the reveal, the divorce papers had been finalized exactly 24 hours ago. Marcus Thornton stood in the master bedroom of what was once their shared home, watching with barely concealed satisfaction as his ex-wife Viven loaded the last of her paintings into cardboard boxes. She looked smaller somehow, diminished in her paint-stained jeans and oversized sweater, nothing like the polished woman who now waited downstairs. "You should really take the Johnsons' portrait commission," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I know money's going to be tight for you now. Your little art studio barely breaks even." Vivian's hands stilled on the canvas she was wrapping. For a moment, Marcus thought he saw something flash in her hazel eyes, something sharp and calculating that reminded him uncomfortably of the boardroom predators at Ashford Global. But then she simply smiled, that same gentle, slightly sad smile she'd worn throughout the entire divorce process. "I'll manage," she said softly. "I always do." Marcus snorted. "Right. Well, the house is mine now, fair and square. Judge agreed you contributed nothing financially to this marriage. 12 years of playing with paints while I built my career." He gestured around the bedroom. "This promotion to VP at Ashford Global? That's real work, Viven. That's what success looks like." "I'm sure you've earned it," Viven replied, her voice maddeningly calm. She taped up the final box and straightened, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in weeks. "Congratulations on your promotion, Marcus, and your engagement to Sienna. I hope you'll both be very happy." The words should have sounded bitter, but they didn't. They sounded genuine, which somehow made Marcus angrier. He'd expected tears, recriminations, begging. Instead, Viven had signed the papers without a fight, agreed to the asset division that left her with almost nothing, and now stood before him with an expression of something that looked almost like pity. "Save your false well wishes," Marcus snapped. "We both know you're just bitter that I'm marrying someone younger, more beautiful, more successful. Sienna is everything you never were." "Sienna is lovely," Viven agreed, picking up one of her boxes. "Does she know she's engaged yet? Or are you still planning to surprise her at the company gala next week?" Marcus stiffened. He hadn't told Viven about his plan to propose to Sienna at Ashford Global's annual charity gala, the biggest social event of the year, where all the executives and board members gathered. "How did you—" "The invitation was in the mail," Viven said simply. "I saw the venue. Very romantic, Marcus. Very public. I'm sure it will be memorable." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. "For what it's worth, I really do hope you find what you're looking for. Goodbye, Marcus." As she descended the stairs, Marcus heard Sienna's sharp voice echo up from the foyer. "Is she finally gone? God, I can't believe you were married to that frumpy little nobody for 12 years. What were you thinking?" Marcus didn't hear Vivian's response, but he heard the front door close quietly. Through the bedroom window, he watched her load boxes into an old sedan, not even a decent car, he noted with satisfaction, and drive away without looking back. Good riddance. 2 days before the reveal, Sienna Drake lounged in Marcus's new corner office at Ashford Global Industries, her designer heels propped up on his mahogany desk. At 28, she was everything Marcus had convinced himself Viven wasn't: ambitious, glamorous, hungry for success. As the company's senior marketing director, She understood the game they were playing. I still can't believe you actually did it, she purred, scrolling through her phone. Divorced the deadweight and cleared the path for us. How much did she take you for in the settlement? Marcus settled into his leather chair with a smug smile. That's the beautiful part. Almost nothing. The prenup was ironclad. She signed it without even reading it 12 years ago, and since her little art studio never made real money, she had no claim to my salary or assets. She walked away with maybe 200,000 tops. Pocket change, Sienna laughed. God, imagine being that pathetic. No career, no money, no prospects. What's she going to do now? Move back in with her parents? She doesn't have parents, Marcus said dismissively. They died years ago. But that's not our problem anymore. Have you picked out your dress for the gala? Sienna's eyes lit up. Red Valentino. It cost more than your ex-wife probably made in a year. She swung her legs down and moved to sit on Marcus's lap. And when you propose in front of everyone, all the board members, the CEO, the entire executive team, everyone will see that Marcus Thornton is a winner. With a winner's wife. Marcus pulled her closer, already imagining the moment. The Ashford Global Charity Gala was legendary, held in the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, attended by the company's mysterious CEO, whom nobody below senior VP level ever actually met. The CEO was notoriously private, running the empire through intermediaries and video conferences, but they always attended the gala in person. Proposing to Sienna there, in front of the company's most powerful players, would cement Marcus's position in the executive hierarchy. It would show everyone that he was serious, stable, committed, exactly the kind of man who deserved his rapid rise through the ranks. Have you ever actually met the CEO? Sienna asked, trailing her fingers along his collar. I've worked here for 3 years, and I've never even seen them. It's always representatives and lawyers. Once briefly during my final interview, Marcus lied smoothly. In truth, he'd interviewed with the chief operating officer, but he liked the idea that he was important enough to meet the CEO. Very businesslike, didn't make much of an impression. His desk phone buzzed. Marcus's assistant's voice crackled through. Mr. Thornton, you have a meeting with the executive transition team in conference room A in 10 minutes. They said it's mandatory for all VPs and above. Transition team? Marcus frowned. What's that about? I don't know, sir. The memo just came down from the CEO's office an hour ago. Marcus exchanged a glance with Sienna. Company-wide meetings from the CEO's office were rare. Did they say what the meeting is about? No, sir. Just that attendance is mandatory. Conference Room A, Ashford Global Industries headquarters. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat in the sleek conference room alongside the other 5 vice presidents. They all looked as confused as he felt. At the head of the table sat 3 people Marcus didn't recognize. 2 lawyers in expensive suits, and a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she ate junior executives for breakfast. Thank you all for coming on short notice, the woman began. My name is Patricia Holloway, Chief Operating Officer of Ashford Global Industries. I'll be brief. After 15 years of maintaining a private profile, our CEO has decided to take a more active, hands-on role in company operations. Starting next week following the charity gala, they will be assuming direct oversight of all executive divisions. A murmur rippled through the room. Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness. Direct oversight meant scrutiny. It meant their decisions would be watched more closely. What prompted this change? Asked Richard Chen, the VP of Finance, voicing what they were all thinking. Patricia's smile was thin. That's the CEO's prerogative. What you need to know is this. There will be a complete review of all executive decisions made in the past 18 months. Personnel files, project approvals, expense accounts, everything. The CEO wants to ensure the company is operating at peak efficiency and ethical standards. Marcus felt sweat prickle at the back of his neck. 18 months ago, he'd made some aggressive decisions about vendor contracts. Nothing illegal exactly, but he'd steered several lucrative deals toward companies where Sienna had connections, ensuring they both benefited from the kickbacks. It was standard practice in his mind, networking, relationship building, but under direct scrutiny from the CEO. I'm sure we all welcome increased transparency, Marcus said smoothly, forcing confidence into his voice. Ashford Global's success speaks for itself. Indeed it does, Patricia replied, and something in her tone made Marcus's stomach clench. The company's current valuation is $8.7 billion with operations in 42 countries. The CEO is very protective of that legacy and very uninvested in ensuring nothing tarnishes it. She stood, the lawyers flanking her like guards. You'll all receive detailed briefings before the gala. I suggest you review your divisional reports carefully. The CEO has a remarkable eye for detail and a very long memory. Good afternoon, gentlemen. As they filed out, Marcus pulled Richard aside. Have you ever actually met the CEO? Do you know anything about them? Richard shrugged. Only rumors. Very private, never gives interviews, inherited the company from family. Word is they're ruthless when crossed, but fair if you're honest. Why? Just curious. Marcus forced a casual tone. New job, want to make a good impression. But as he walked back to his office, past the gleaming chrome and glass that spoke of Ashford Global's billions, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The ground beneath his feet felt suddenly less solid. He found Sienna in his office, touching up her lipstick. So, what was the big meeting? CEOs coming out of hiding, taking a more hands-on approach. Marcus poured himself a scotch from his desk bar, even though it was only 2 p.m. They're reviewing everything from the past 18 months. Sienna's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. Everything? Including the Meridian contract you pushed through last year, the one where I happened to introduce you to the CEO's cousin? That was legitimate business networking, Marcus said sharply. Nothing wrong with building relationships, but they both knew that the $50,000 consulting fee that Sienna had received from Meridian Industries had come directly from the markup Marcus had approved on their contract with Ashford Global. It was a gray area at best. I'm sure it's fine, Sienna said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. We're both smart. We've been careful. And after the gala, after you propose, you'll be even more established. They're not going to touch a VP who's about to become a family man. Marcus nodded, trying to believe it. The gala was in 5 days. He just needed to hold steady until then. The night before the gala, Viven. Ashford sat in her newly furnished penthouse apartment, reviewing reports on her tablet, while Mozart played softly in the background. The apartment was in the Pinnacle Tower, the most expensive residential building in the city, but she'd chosen a modest 3-bedroom unit rather than the sprawling penthouse suite. Old habits died hard. Everything is in place for tomorrow, Patricia Holloway said, settling into the chair across from her. The executive team has been briefed. Well, most of them. Your ex-husband and his new fiancée remain blissfully unaware. Viven didn't look up from the financial reports. And the investigation into the Meridian contract? Complete. Marcus approved a 37% markup on services that Meridian Industries then kicked back through Sienna Drake's consulting business. He essentially stole $280,000 from the company while enriching himself and his mistress. We have emails, bank transfers, everything. Not the only irregularity? No. We found 6 similar schemes over the past 14 months. Total theft approaches $1.2 million. He's been very creative. Patricia paused. You know, when you first asked me to dig into his activities, I thought you might be looking for revenge. But this is actual fraud. Viven finally looked up, her hazel eyes cool and assessing. I wasn't looking for revenge, Patricia. I was looking for the truth. Marcus always claimed his rapid success at Ashford Global was due to his brilliance and work ethic. I wanted to know if that was true, or if he'd been cutting corners. He's been cutting corners and lining his pockets, Patricia confirmed. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Viven set down her tablet and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably celebrating with Sienna, convinced he'd traded up from his struggling artist wife to a power couple future. He had no idea that Vivian Ashford Thornton was actually Vivian Ashford, sole heir to the Ashford Global fortune. Her grandfather, Jonathan Ashford, had founded the company 50 years ago. When he died 8 years ago, Control had passed to her grandmother, Elizabeth, who'd run the empire from the shadows while publicly maintaining that the company was managed by a board of directors. When Elizabeth died 2 years ago, everything had come to Viven, the $8.7 billion company, the real estate portfolio, the investment funds, the art collection worth hundreds of millions, because Vivian's little paintings weren't amateur efforts. She was actually a successful artist who sold works under a pseudonym for 6 figures apiece. That was how she'd met Marcus 12 years ago, at a gallery opening where he'd been trying to impress clients and she'd been displaying her work. He'd never known who she really was. She'd been so tired of men who wanted her money, her name, her connections. Marcus had seemed different, middle class, ambitious but genuine, someone who wanted her for herself. So she'd hidden her wealth behind lawyers and trusts. She'd posed as a struggling artist. She'd lived modestly in Marcus's house, contributed to bills with money from her small commissions, and let him believe he was the successful one. And for 12 years, she'd loved him genuinely, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth, waiting until he was secure enough in himself and their marriage to handle the revelation. But then came Sienna Drake, the affair that Marcus thought he'd hidden so well, the betrayal that had gutted Viven more than any financial loss ever could. "I gave him every chance," Viven said quietly. "Even during the divorce, I offered him a fair settlement. I suggested marriage counseling. I tried to save what we had, and he kicked me out of his house, my grandfather's house that I bought and put in his name, like I was trash." "So tomorrow," Patricia prompted, "tomorrow Marcus Thornton is going to propose to his mistress in front of 400 people, including all of Ashford Global's executives and board members. And I'm going to introduce myself as the CEO he's never met." Vivian's reflection in the window looked nothing like the soft, gentle woman Marcus had divorced. "And then I'm going to give him a choice." "What kind of choice?" Viven turned, and her smile was sharp as broken glass. "The kind that reveals exactly who people really are." The charity gala. The Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom glittered like a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors. Women in designer gowns mingled with men in bespoke tuxedos, champagne flutes in hand, while a string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. Marcus Thornton felt like he was floating. This was his moment. In his pocket, the engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond that had cost him $20,000, waited for the perfect moment. Sienna stood beside him in her red Valentino gown, looking like a goddess, drawing admiring stares from every man in the room. "Have you seen the CEO yet?" Sienna whispered. "I've been watching the entrance. Nobody's arrived who looks like they own a billion-dollar company." Marcus scanned the crowd. He recognized most of the faces, VPs, directors, senior managers. The board members held court near the bar, distinguished older men and women who rarely spoke to anyone below executive level, but no obvious CEO candidate. "Fashionably late, probably," Marcus said. "Builds mystique." "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia Holloway's voice rang out as she took the small stage at the front of the ballroom. "Thank you all for attending Ashford Global's annual charity gala. Before we begin the formal program, I have a very special announcement." The room quieted. Marcus felt a flutter of anticipation. This wasn't the scheduled time for his proposal, but maybe. As many of you know, Ashford Global has been led for the past 15 years by a CEO who preferred to maintain their privacy and run the company through trusted representatives. Tonight, that changes. It is my honor to introduce, for the first time in a public company capacity, the woman who has guided Ashford Global to its current $8.7 billion valuation. The granddaughter of our founder, the sole owner and CEO of Ashford Global Industries, Ms. Viven Ashford. The spotlight swung to the ballroom's main entrance, and Viven walked in, but not the Viven that Marcus knew. This woman wore a black evening gown that probably cost more than his car, with diamonds at her throat and ears that caught the light like captured stars. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was styled in an elegant updo. She moved with the confidence of someone who owned not just the company, but the building, the city block, probably half the city. She looked like money, old money, serious money. She looked like power. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. No, this wasn't possible. This was some mistake. Some woman who happened to look like his ex-wife. Some cosmic joke. But then Vivian's eyes found his across the ballroom, and he knew. The recognition in her gaze was unmistakable. Sienna's hand clutched his arm. "Marcus," she hissed. "Marcus, that's your ex-wife. What the hell is going on?" I can't. Marcus couldn't form words. His brain couldn't process what he was seeing. Vivian took the stage beside Patricia, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent her life in boardrooms. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I know many of you are surprised to see me. For those who don't know me personally, let me be clear. I am Vivian Ashford, daughter of Richard Ashford, granddaughter of Jonathan Ashford, our company's founder. I inherited controlling interest in Ashford Global 2 years ago and have been managing operations through our excellent executive team." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "But recent events have prompted me to take a more direct role. I believe in transparency, accountability, and ethical business practices, which is why I've spent the past 3 months conducting a comprehensive audit of all executive decisions and financial transactions." Marcus felt his knees go weak. Sienna's nails dug into his arm. "Most of our executives have performed admirably," Vivian continued, "but unfortunately our investigation uncovered significant irregularities, specifically a pattern of fraud involving inflated vendor contracts and kickback schemes that siphoned approximately $1.2 million from company funds over 14 months. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The board members near the bar suddenly looked very attentive. "Mr. Marcus Thornton," Vivian said, and the spotlight swung to pin him like a bug. "Vice President of Operations, could you please join me on stage?" Marcus felt 400 pairs of eyes turn toward him. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "Marcus." Vivian's voice was softer now, but somehow more terrible. "Please, we need to have a conversation." Somehow his legs carried him forward, through the parting crowd, up the 3 stairs to the stage, under the spotlight that made him feel like he was burning. Up close, Vivian looked different. Not just the clothes and the styling, but something fundamental in her bearing. This was the woman who'd signed his paychecks for 5 years. The woman who'd watched him climb the corporate ladder, divorce her, and celebrate like he'd won the lottery. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly, so only he could hear. Surprised. "Vivian, Yes, I'm CEO of the company where you work, where you've worked for the past 5 years, ever since I arranged for your application to be fast-tracked." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Did you really think your rapid promotions were all merit-based? That you were just so brilliant that you rose from a mid-level manager to VP in record time? You helped me?" Marcus felt reality shifting beneath his feet. "I loved you," Vivian said simply. "I wanted you to succeed. I wanted you to feel proud of yourself before I told you the truth about who I am. But you were never satisfied, were you? Each promotion just made you hungrier, more arrogant, more willing to cut corners." She gestured to Patricia, who handed her a folder. Vivian opened it, showing Marcus pages of financial records, emails, bank transfers. The Meridian contract, the Westbrook deal, Carrington Industries, South Shore Logistics. 6 fraudulent schemes, Marcus. You stole from my company while sleeping beside me every night. And then, when you decided to trade me in for a younger model, you threw me out like garbage and took everything I'd given you." "I didn't know," Marcus whispered. "I didn't know it was your company. I didn't know." "Would it have mattered?" Vivian's voice was sharp. "If you'd known I owned Ashford Global, would you have treated me better, loved me more? Or would you have just been better at hiding your theft and your affair?" Marcus had no answer. In his peripheral vision, he could see Sienna in the crowd, her face pale, already edging toward the exit. "I'm going to give you a choice," Vivian said, her voice carrying to the entire silent ballroom now. "You can resign quietly right now, and I won't press criminal charges. You'll repay the $1.2 million over time, through wage garnishment if necessary, but you'll avoid jail. You'll never work in this industry again, but you'll be free. Or," Marcus croaked, "or you can fight me. Claim you were entrapped, that I manipulated you, that this is revenge for the divorce. You can lawyer up and try to destroy my reputation to save yours." Vivian's eyes were cold now, all warmth extinguished. "And I will bury you, Marcus. I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure you face the maximum criminal penalties. I will personally testify about every conversation where you bragged about cutting corners. And I will make certain that everyone in this industry knows exactly what kind of man you are." The ballroom was so quiet Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. "What's it going to be?" Vivian asked. Marcus looked out at the crowd, at the board members watching with impassive faces, at his fellow VPs, some smirking, others looking away in embarrassment, at Sienna, who'd made it to the exit and was now fleeing through the doors. The woman he'd thought he was trading up for, abandoning him the moment things got difficult. He looked back at Vivian, at the woman he'd spent 12 years with, the woman he'd dismissed as unambitious, unsuccessful, beneath him, the woman who'd actually been supporting him every step of the way, loving him, believing in him, even as he betrayed her. "I'll resign," he whispered. "I'll repay every dollar. I'm sorry." Vivian nodded once, crisp and businesslike. "Patricia will handle the paperwork. Security will escort you out." She paused, and for just a moment, something like sadness flickered across her face. "For what it's worth, Marcus, I really did love you. I would have given you everything. All you had to do was love me back." "I did love you," Marcus said, and realized with crushing certainty that it might even be true. I wanted more. More than $8 billion in someone who genuinely cared about you." Vivian's laugh was hollow. "Then I guess you wanted something that doesn't exist. Goodbye, Marcus." Security guards appeared at his elbows. As they led him through the ballroom, past the staring faces and whispered conversations, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in one of the ornate mirrors. He looked small, diminished, exactly how he'd once described Vivian. The irony wasn't lost on him. Epilogue. 6 months later, Marcus Thornton stood in line at the unemployment office, a far cry from the executive suite at Ashford Global. The fraud investigation had made industry news. No company would touch him now. He was working part-time at a hardware store, every paycheck garnished to repay his debt to Ashford Global. It would take him 20 years to clear the balance. Sienna had dumped him via text the night of the gala. She'd blamed him for ruining her career, even though Vivian hadn't pressed charges against her. Within a month, Sienna had left the city entirely, chasing opportunities elsewhere. The house, the beautiful house that Marcus had thought was his, had been quietly repossessed. Turned out it had always been owned by an Ashford family trust. Marcus was now renting a studio apartment in a neighborhood he once would have sneered at. He'd lost everything: career, reputation, home, fiancé. All of it gone in one night, because he'd been too blind to see what he had, too greedy to appreciate it, too arrogant to value the woman who'd actually loved him. Sometimes, late at night, he Googled Vivian's name. She'd made headlines as the youngest female CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Business magazines praised her leadership. She'd increased Ashford Global's value by another $1 billion in 6 months. There were photos of her at charity events, industry conferences, art gallery openings. In every picture, she looked confident, powerful, happy. She'd moved on completely. Marcus had thought he was trading up when he divorced Vivian for Sienna. He'd thought he was climbing to something better. Instead, he'd thrown away a queen to chase a mirage. And now, standing in line at the unemployment office, filling out forms that asked for his employment history, which now included the word resigned under circumstances he could never explain, Marcus finally understood the magnitude of what he'd lost. Not just the money, though. $8 billion would have been nice. Not just the power, though. Being married to a CEO had its perks. But the one person who'd loved him for himself, who'd seen potential in him, who'd believed in him enough to help him succeed, even while hiding who she really was. He'd kicked her out in the rain, and she'd been the secret billionaire owner of his entire world. The irony was crushing. But not as crushing as the knowledge that he had no one to blame but himself. As for Vivian, she returned to her penthouse that evening after another successful board meeting, poured herself a glass of wine, and looked out at the city lights. She'd built Ashford Global's value by another billion. She'd cleaned house of corrupt executives. She'd established new ethical guidelines and transparency measures. But sometimes, in quiet moments, she still felt the ache of what she'd lost. Not Marcus exactly. She'd stopped loving him the moment he'd thrown her belongings into the rain. But the dream of what they could have been if he'd just been the man she'd believed him to be. Still, she reminded herself, she'd survived. She'd rebuilt. And she'd done it on her own terms, without compromising who she was. That was worth more than any marriage built on lies. Vivian raised her glass to the city, to new beginnings, and to the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well, and she was living very well indeed.